And we are live with another edition of the All Gas No Break Sports Show. I am one of your co-hosts, Nicholas Bavona, joined alongside once again by my co-host, Andrew Johnson. And Andrew, it is finally time. We are just 1 week as of this recording on Monday night, October 28th. We are just 1 week away from the start of college basketball. A fun time for both you and I. We love the sport as it is in terms of just any college sport itself. You know, we're big fans of college football. We're big fans of the NBA. Now, of course, big fans of college basketball. And after a very wild season that we had last year in college basketball, maybe for us, unfortunately, a really bitter end to the season, but still nonetheless a very exciting year of 2023/2024. And now we head into the 2024-2025 season with a lot of storylines to look into. UConn obviously is trying to do something that hasn't been done since the John Wooden era with UCLA. They are trying to go for a three-peat this season in the college basketball world as they have won back-to-back national championships. They did lose a lot in the offseason, but they still have a very good team on paper. We'll break down their roster. But, Johnson, I know you are more than excited, as I am, to be covering college basketball this season.
Yeah, it's really the greatest time of the year. This is my favorite sport to cover. It's more so than the NFL, college football, baseball, whatever, NBA. It's college basketball. Always such versatility. I feel like NIL maybe ruining the sport already. It's only been here for about a year or so, but I'm sure as time goes on, we will get caps on NIL and all that fun stuff. So we'll everyone will figure it out eventually. But yeah, I'm just excited to talk college basketball right now.
Yeah, and what we're going to be doing in the show tonight is we're going to be breaking down some of the big Power 5 conferences, kind of like what we did for our college football preview earlier on this season, where we're going to be breaking down some of the Power 5 schools and what they did in this past offseason in terms of, as you mentioned, the transfer portal and what they're bringing back from last year's team. We're even going to be breaking down some maybe a mid-major to maybe look out for this upcoming season, because as we know, once it comes March, those mid-major teams start to really kind of surprise you and then take over and make a run in the NCAA tournament. And as well as giving out our picks for the John Wooden Award and our teams to make the Final Four, the national championship game, and of course, our pick to win this season's national championship. Now, keep in mind, if we pick you to win the national championship, you're more than likely screwed at the end of the season because, Johnson, we haven't really done as many previews for college basketball season, but for those listeners that are getting our first intake of college basketball, what is the mushing hour?
Well, the mushing hour is a play on the witching hour, uh, made famous by Scott Hansen and NFL Red Zone, and it's where winners become losers there, and where losers become winners there. But for us, it's just if both of us agree on a pick, like, oh yeah, we're sure, and we're making this up right now. Boston College is going to win the ACC. Spoiler alert, they're not. They're guaranteed not to win because both of us have picked them to win. It is a mush, and that outcome is no longer on the table.
I got a great example for any college basketball fan. For the NFL, for those that don't have, maybe have not listened to any of our NFL episodes, at the beginning of the season, I picked the Jets and the 49ers to make the Super Bowl. The Jets are 2-6. The Niners are 4-4. They are both really playing bad right now this season. So that does play a factor
Who did
sometimes
I
when we
pick?
make our picks. You picked. I could scroll over really quickly. You had the Chiefs and the Cowboys. The
You
Cowboys
know,
have also been pretty bad this season. The Chiefs have a
yeah.
very good chance.
Oh yeah, yeah, I got half that right. I'm so excited.
Yeah, I mean, you just picked the Super Bowl that America's going to hate.
Yeah, I know. I hate it too.
You wanted to pick two AFC teams, in fairness.
I did. I wanted to pick the Jets, so
Yeah, you wanted the Jets. And you know what? I did it for you, so you're welcome.
thank you.
Um, so for those listening for college basketball, just be very worry if we do both agree on a certain conference or even national champion when we make our picks for this mushing out for the first time this season. So let's dive into some of the conferences, Johnson. I think we'll start off with how about the ACC? We'll go into first, and I think on paper, when you ever talk about the ACC, you're always talking about two teams, that being Duke and North Carolina. Those have been the two clear-cut favorites for decades and decades now. They're always the teams to beat in that conference. We've seen some other teams in years past, even like a team like, per se, NC State last season, pull off that stunner to win the ACC, go on to that miraculous run in the NCAA tournament that won the entire conference at the end of the year. So You could be at the end of the season the ACC regular season champion, but once it comes conference championship time, that could be a very different story for this conference. So, is there any team in particular you would like to talk about more in depth detail as to why you maybe think that they're going to win the ACC upcoming this season?
So that's a great question. So do I want to talk about them, or I feel like I have to talk about them? Because
Probably
I
more
feel
of a
like
have to because I know you don't
you
really
have
like
to,
this
yeah, you
conference.
have. Listen, I will say that this conference is a bit underrated, as crazy as that sounds. I feel like them and the Big East, each, even though they are my mortal enemies as a Big East fan, uh, the ACC is underrated every single time they go into the NCAA tournament, much like the Big East, because I feel like the Big 12 gets all these teams in every year, and they and seven out, or eight of them out of 9 or 10 teams that send completely suck. Where the ACC will send 5 teams, maybe 6 teams. The Big East usually sends 5 or 6 teams. They only sent 3 last year, which was a real shame. But those teams that they do send, they're in the round of 16 or the Sweet 16. They're in the Elite Eight. They're in the Final Four. They're making national championship games. Where the Big 12 and Big 10 teams tend to crap out by the end of the first weekend.
Right.
So I guess we have to talk about the number one recruit in the country, or the is he the number one recruit? Cooper
No,
Flag and Duke,
Cooper Flag's number one, and
because
it's
I know Dylan
for ES,
Harper and Ace Bailey are 2 and 3 then.
if you look at ESPN 100, Cooper Flag is the number one player, but
Yeah,
I think he's the consensus number one player for
yeah.
everyone
It depends
going
on
into
who
this
you
class.
go to, but yeah, but we have to talk about him and Duke, um, because unfortunately nowadays freshmen aren't that valuable. Uh, the transfer portal has made that seniors are in they're in high demand now. So if you're a college senior and you have that 5th year of eligibility, if you redshirted a year and you're 23, 24 years old, you can transfer to the team immediately. They're going to be the priority now, but that it's a little bit different because Cooper Flag may be the last of that dying breed. 5-star, number one overall freshman, maybe taking top 5 in the NBA draft. So it's going to be interesting to see the trend he's going to set going forward here.
Could be the number one pick, because it's just according to some people, he could be the number one. I don't know if I agree with it, but that's
Yeah,
besides the
it's going to
point.
be interesting, but
Um,
I'll let you talk about any teams that you want to talk about as well, because I know
I
we'll go into Duke.
Yeah, I think you look at Duke. Well, we'll talk about what they have in coming, what they brought back, and what they lost in the offseason. Another team that you can look at also is obviously North Carolina, that I mentioned. But North Carolina, Johnson, lost a lot from last season. Amarno Baycott, the biggest name that they lost, their big time center. They do get RJ Davis back, which is a huge plus for this team. And they even have some nice transfers coming in. Cade Tyson from Belmont, who averaged 16 points per game. He could be a nice player for this Tar Heels team. Ian Jackson was the number 7 player in the ESPN Top
Guy I would have
100.
loved to have at St. John's, by the way,
Yeah.
Ian
Uh,
Jackson.
Drake Powell, number 13 as well. So they got some big time recruits coming in terms of freshmen, some nice transfers as well. Van Allen Lubin from Vanderbilt as well, they got. So you get the sense that Duke and North Carolina are probably going to be, those are the two teams that are going to be contending at the top. And let's keep in mind, Johnson, that this is also the new variation of the ACC, because we also have now newcomers in SMU and Stanford. We've seen that in college football this season. They now get their first crack of it in college basketball. And they made some moves. I don't know if it's necessarily going to be enough to be competing with some of these higher tier schools in the ACC, but it's going to be their first time in the ACC. I think one of the team to note also, Johnson, is Virginia. Um, the big
The
news
absence of Tony Bennett
they lost Tony Bennett just a couple weeks, maybe it was about a week ago. I think that news came
about a week
about.
ago. Yeah.
So yeah, now they have a new head coach, having to start over, I guess, a new variation of this team, and a team that a lot of people did not think should make the NCAA tournament, including ourselves, and that's for different reasons, nonetheless. But
And it was proven, by the way.
yeah, they had a very bad game. What was it? It's Colorado State they played, right?
Awful, awful
Yeah, that
basketball.
was probably one of the worst games I've ever watched in my entire life. But yeah, new head coach they have to deal with this season after Bennett kind of surprised everyone by retiring before the season started. So there is big news there. The only other team that I probably will want to talk about, I guess this is probably for bias reasons, is probably Syracuse. Um, they got some big transfers coming in. They lost they lost guys like Judah Mintz in the offseason. They are getting back JJ Starling, who was a nice player from them last year. But the transfer portal is where they did a lot of work. Jerry Davis from Delaware, Lucas Taylor from Georgia State, Eddie Lampkin, they've been going crazy about. the big time center from Colorado, and they even got some nice recruits in Donovan Freeman, who was the number 6 player in the ESPN 100, and of course they're still waiting to hear about what happens with Kyan Anthony if he potentially goes to Syracuse to follow in his father's footsteps, that being his father, Carmelo Anthony. But that'll be for next season, obviously.
Yeah,
But
and I do want to talk about a little bit about him because we know it's Syracuse and USC. I think over
I was
to head head.
Syracuse, USC. I don't know if Rutgers was the last team. There was one other team with that. He
I
was
think
down
it's
to three
between
teams.
Cuse and USC though because
I think it's more
uh
likely those two.
yeah I think it's gonna be Cuse and I've been saying this for a while. I think he's better than Bronny. Um, I've been saying
It's
this for a couple
Auburn.
of years now.
Auburn's the last team.
Auburn's the last one because
Yeah,
Rutgers did offer him though.
yeah.
Rutgers did offer him.
You know how Bruce Pearl is. He likes to get those like big time players.
Yeah. I think he's a tremendous talent, and obviously he won't be on campus this year, but that's be something for next year in our preview because I think make a real impact
Yeah,
and possibly even be a one and done player. So,
yeah.
got to keep
Very
that
well.
in mind.
So any other team in the ACC that you would like to talk about before we? I guess we still haven't dove into Duke yet.
I
We know
mean,
what they.
we touched about Duke a little bit.
I know
Wake
they lost a
Forest
lot.
maybe.
They lost. I will say before we go into Wake Forest, quick. They lost a lot of players. Duke, that's to be expected. They lost Filipowski. They lost McCain. They lost Jeremy Roach, Mark Mitchell. They get Tyrese Proctor back. They get Caleb Foster back. A lot of transfers as well coming in, and of course, you mentioned Cooper Flagg and Isaiah Evans are the big two recruits they got this past season. So John Shire has a good opportunity to keep this team going. But yeah, you could talk about Wake Forest if you want.
Yeah, I mean, I think Wake Forest is going to be one of those sleeper teams in the ACC. They
Well,
were.
according to Vegas, they're the third best. They have the third best odds in the ACC.
Yeah, I know they have the third best odds, but I don't
Still
feel
could,
like that's.
yeah, it's tough.
It's always tough with a team like this because you never really know how a team's going to act until they actually are on the roster. If that makes sense.
Right.
And they've been like one of these up and coming programs for I feel like the longest time, and they're eventually gonna have to make that leap. And are they gonna make that leap this year? I kind of hope so because I think like we need some parity in the ACC. That's what it desperately lacks.
I think a team to also look out for is Miami. Larinaga always gets that team somehow like towards the end of the season phenomenally good, and they always make a run. That's probably a team that when you go to the tournament where maybe they don't have as great of a regular season, but they could make that type of similar run that NC State had last season and potentially win the whole thing. Um, with that being said, Johnson, I guess let's go into our picks as to who we think will win the ACC. I think we both are going to. Unless I'm wrong, I think we're both in agreement for who wins this conference.
Yeah, you're gonna say Duke.
I'm going to pick Duke. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean I think I have to pick Duke at this point.
yeah.
I mean I know UNC is the other team that's right there, but it's pretty much do you have more faith in Ian Jackson or Cooper Flag, and I
I
have a little
just
bit
think
more
I
faith in
just
Cooper Flag. That's what I
I
think
just think
boils
North
down
Carolina
to.
lost a little bit more. Like Duke lost a lot, but they replaced it like very very well. And it's not that North Carolina didn't replace their players well. It's just more of Duke on paper should be the team to be in the ACC, and Vegas agrees with that as well. But like I said, they were the number one seed last year in the tournament, and they eventually lost to NC in that championship game. So anything's realistically possible once it comes tournament time in March. Um, let's move into the next conference. Let's go into the Big 12, a conference that I know you already mentioned that you love so much. That is obviously a joke, folks, but has produced a lot of teams in tournament time for what we've seen in previous years. We obviously a couple of previous national champions the last couple of years. Baylor, it seems like a lifetime ago, has won the national title, but that was maybe 3 or 4 years ago that national title happened.
2021, I believe.
Yeah, I really think that was. It feels like a decade ago that happened, but yeah, it was that recent. We know how Bill Self is with Kansas and what they bring to the table every single year. Houston, obviously being added to the conference last season, had a very nice year one. They have been always a prominent team, as well as Iowa State and a newcomer in Arizona. So there's probably 5 teams, Johnson, it looks like, that realistically could make their case this season to being the Big 12 champion at the end of the year. What team in particular are you looking forward to in this conference?
Well, there's two teams that I kind of have faith in here, and it's going to be like eighth year, like senior, Hunter Dickinson in Kansas. I feel like
Yeah,
that's an obvious pick at this point. This guy was the most sought after prospect of all time. It
Mhm.
feels like
After he left Michigan, yeah.
after he left Michigan, and then you have to talk about L.J. Cryer in Houston as well. That's the other big piece of the puzzle here. So I feel like it's a 2-man race here. I know there's other teams kind of lurking in the shadows. You have your Baylor's that might be able to be competitive, but I think it's going to boil down to: do you trust Hunter Dickinson in Kansas, or do you trust L.J. Cryer and Houston?
Well,
Um,
Baylor got VJ Edgecombe, who was one of the top ranked
Another
players.
guy I wanted at St. John's.
Yeah,
Thank you for rubbing that in.
that was. I didn't mean to rub it in, but I'm just saying that helps Baylor tremendously. And they got Jeremy Roach, the guy I mentioned from Duke. He transfers to Baylor this season, so Baylor's got a very good team on paper. They realistically could be one of those teams, like I mentioned, to beat at the end of the season. But I think another team also like Arizona. I feel like lost a lot. You know, you're getting Caleb Love back, which is big. But I feel like you look at who they lost in this past season. I feel like they might have a little bit of a I don't want to say dump off from last season, but maybe a little bit more of a drop off. I think is a better term for it. Like they'll be good, probably tournament enough good, but I mean we saw what happened to them in the
They're not going to
tournament.
be good.
Yeah, we saw they're not going to be number 2 seed good. I think they're still tournament good, but they're not number 2 seed good. Albeit they lost in the first round, but that's besides the point. Um, so you know, you look at the rest of the conference. I think it's tough because Kansas also lost some big players. You know, McCullough, Furphy. You know, they're bringing back Dickinson, which obviously is the biggest part of the entire team. But their transfer portal, they did pretty well. A guy that you and I both know, AJ Storr from Wisconsin, is now coming to the team.
Yeah,
Uh,
no defense store, but he's a phenomenal athlete,
Great
shooter.
score.
You have Zeke Mayo that's going to be there, one of the top mid-major players in the country. So they
Floyd
have
Badunga.
guys.
I think that's how I think that's how you pronounce it. The big freshman coming in as well. So they have some big
Yeah,
pieces.
they have some big pieces to go around their star player, which I believe is how you're supposed to build in college basketball, at least nowadays.
And if you look at Vegas's odds, Johnson, right now, it's a close race between Kansas and Houston as the two favorites in this conference. And I think that is the right way to go about it for this conference. But like I mentioned, with Baylor, Baylor, Iowa State, and Arizona, those teams certainly could make the case to maybe be contending for the Big 12 title at the end of the year. Um, who would be your pick to win the Big 12, though?
I would have to pick Kansas. I'm gonna trust the known commodity known as Bill Self, worth his weight in gold in the college basketball world. And Hunter Dickinson has that pedigree and experience to lead a team deep into March. So give me Kansas.
And I mean, a lot of people are picking him to win the Wooden Award. I mean, he's probably the odds-on favorite right now, if I
I
had to
don't.
guess.
I know he's the odds-on favorite. But I don't think I would pick him. Does that make sense?
Right. No, I agree with that. I agree with that. I think a lot of people are picking him, but I feel like it's tough to pick him. I don't want to say like he's going to be a good player, but we know that we'll see what happens with that. Um, if I had to pick one to win the conference, I'm trying to. I don't want to like agree on every single thing. I would probably pick Kansas, but I think for the sake of it, I will just go with Houston to win the Big 12 this year. Um, a rough end of the season for them last year. I think they can get back on track. They did lose Jamal Sheed, but you mentioned LJ Cryer. Getting him back is huge. They had a nice, you know, incoming freshman class as well coming in, and they're returning a lot of key players from that team last season. I think that's also another good thing to building good college basketball schools is you bring back some of your core guys from last year, and Kelvin Sampson is one of the best coaches in college basketball. I think he'll be able to get that team back on track and be contending for another Big 12 title potentially.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely one of the most consistent coaches in college basketball.
right, and that's all you can really ask for. Him and Bill Self are probably the two biggest consistent guys right now in the Big 12 that we have, especially with guys also Scott Drew as well, and Tommy Lloyd. It was escaping my head for a second. I'm trying to think of his name. Coach from Arizona. Let's dive now into the Big Ten, Johnson, another conference I know you love near and dear to your heart. But if you look at this conference, I don't I don't want to say it's tough to who I'm picking right now,
I think there's 6 teams that can win the Big Ten.
but I really think this could be wide open. I agree with you. What team in particular would you like to talk about? That like kind of
I
catches
mean,
your eye?
I mean, there's a lot of teams I want to talk about, but should I talk about all these teams? Is the real question here.
Yeah,
I would love to talk about. I would love to talk about
there's.
Rutgers.
I knew that's why I thought you were gonna go with that. I mean, how can you
I
not?
mean, they have Dylan Harper, Ace Bailey, 2-3, number 2 and 3 in the nation.
Yeah,
Uh, it's looking like they're going to be one hell of a 1-2 punch.
they
And
got Tyson Acuff from Eastern Michigan, who was averaging
I mean, they
21
they
points a
lost
game.
Cliff. They lost Cliff Omoray, which is a huge loss.
Huge
One
loss.
of the
Yeah,
most sought, yeah, one of the most sought after big men in the entire portal. So I don't know how they're going to be able to like recover from this, if that makes sense.
yeah,
But
that makes
I'm
sense.
very curious to see how this works out.
He went to
On
Alabama,
paper,
right?
yeah, on paper, this is one of the best teams Rutgers has ever seen.
Oh, by far, yeah.
Yeah, this
But
is Rutgers basketball like tuned up to an 11 right now.
the question is going to be, can that be enough to win the Big Ten? I don't
I'm
know.
not sure if it can because there's a couple teams ahead of him. At least on paper, Purdue I still think is the odds-on favorite to win the Big
You
Ten, at
don't
least
you don't think
by
they
the
have a drop off
bookmakers.
this season?
They're gonna have a. They're gonna listen. They're gonna have
They have
a.
another. They have. Correct me if I'm wrong. They have another like big center, right? Like
They
another
do.
7 foot tall guy.
They do.
Not
I
like
forget
Zach
his name.
Edey good, but yeah, I can't think of his name either. I'd have to look it up. But I remember seeing him last season,
No, but
and I
it's like a
said,
factory where they just make where if you're over
yeah.
7'3", you play
How in
basketball for
the
Purdue.
what I'm looking at right now. They actually have a couple people that are over 7 foot. Will Berg and Daniel Jacobson. They have 2 7 foot, two over 7 foot two centers.
I
So
mean, it's just a. I think it was Will Burr because he was the freshman
I
last
think it
year.
was Berg. Yeah,
He's also the international guy. I think he's from Sweden.
I believe you're right. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So Will Burr is the guy I think we saw on the bench last year, and it's just it's like I don't know how to put this. Like they know what they like. They
I
know
mean,
what wins
you're
basketball games.
bringing back Braden Smith, who was a nice scorer for them last year too. He might be the leading scorer for this team this year with Edie now no longer on this team, but also got a couple 4 stars in the incoming freshmen. They didn't really do anything in the transfer portal, so we'll see if that does play a factor. But as I mentioned with the in the Big 12, I mean, just returning some of your key guys is more than enough to win some of these conferences at the end of the day. So that very well could be the case for Purdue this season. I necessarily don't really like him as much this season to maybe win the conference. I don't know. I don't know. I think just losing Edie is
Yeah, yeah,
monumental.
yeah. I don't blame you. We can
Um,
also talk about Indiana.
Mike Woodson, Nick's
Yeah, we
legend.
could talk about Mike Woodson. I know he was on the hot sheet. Mackenzie Magabo. I think I can't say. I think it's Magabo. I'm probably butchering that, but I want him at St. John's. He had a very slow start last year, but when he picked it up and he started getting used to the college game, he was almost unstoppable. As a true freshman, putting up 12 and 4 a game. I know he wasn't really that efficient from the field, but he gets another year of strength training. He's a top 10 recruit. He has he was Big Ten Rookie of the Year last year. It's all up for him this year. And if he could take on that Trace Jackson Davis like role that Indiana had from him for those 4 or 5 years he was there, this could be a very, very special team.
They also got Bryson Tucker, another top player in the class from last season that could very well make an impact for them this season. And Omar Ballo from Arizona, they're a very good scorer for the Wildcats now, who is coming into this team as well. Mike Woodson had to do a big job in the recruiting stages because, as you mentioned, he was on the hot seat for a little bit last year. So he's trying to make sure that he keeps that seat not hot, just maybe
He wants it
warm,
nice and cool. He wants
nice
it.
and cool. Yeah,
So one thing I do want to talk about is Nebraska, though, and I don't think they're going to be very good at all. I think Fred Hoiberg may be fired at the end of the
he might be
season,
fired. Yeah,
which is crazy because he looked like to be the savior of this coach of this
university.
university. He's hometown guy. I know he went to Iowa State, but he is a Nebraska kid, and he had a decent enough career in the NBA, not only as a player but even as a head coach of Iowa State. He was tremendous there. He did okay with the Bulls. I mean, it wasn't really anything to
It
write
was all
home
right.
about,
He was there for
but
a cup of coffee.
yeah, for a cup of coffee, he was there. But as a college head coach in the Big 12, he was phenomenal. And I know they made the tournament last year, and that may be enough to kind of keep his seat on the cooler side right now. But the clock's ticking on him. If he gets off to a bad start, especially a Big 12 play, a Big 10 play, excuse me, he might be out the door by the end of the season.
All right. So with that being said, Johnson, any other team you want to talk about before we make our pick for the Big Ten?
I think we've kind of. I know, just to mention that Michigan State, UCLA, Ohio State, all in that all in that range of good teams. But I think I'm just gonna go pick Rutgers here for my Big Ten champion.
Big and Rutgers.
I'm gonna pick Rutgers. I'm gonna pick the dark
Okay.
horse here. I like the freshmen. I think they're gonna develop nicely as the season goes along, and they may not win it all in March, but they can at least get a banner in Piscataway or in is it New Brunswick? I forget what
It's
campus is the main campus.
I'm pretty sure it's New Brunswick,
It is New Brunswick. All right,
or
so
maybe
second guess is
it's Piscataway. I don't know. I'm sorry to
they
any
have a
Rutgers
lot of
fans.
campuses. They have a
Yeah, they
lot
have
of
a lot of
campuses.
campuses. Yeah, I know the football team plays in Piscataway, so I don't know if that's maybe that is a fact. I don't know. Anyway, for my pick for the Big Ten, I'm gonna go with UCLA. I'm gonna go with the newcomer to win the Big Ten this
Another
season.
historic program. Another historic
Yeah.
program.
Um, they had to go a lot of work, Johnson, in the offseason. They lost a lot of key players. Big guys they got in the transfer portal. Sky Clark, I love from Louisville. I think that's a big get for them. Uh, Tyler, I'm trying to make sure I don't butcher it, but I'm probably going to Bilodeau from Oregon State. They got as well. Dominic Harris from Loyola Marymount. A lot of guys that averaged double-digit figures last season are coming from the transfer portal to UCLA. Trent Perry, who was the number 27 ranked player in the ESPN 100, is also committing to the school. And they're bringing back a lot of key players, guys like Dylan Andrews, Sebastian Mack, Lazar Stenovich. They're returning a lot of key people and bringing in a lot of really good transfers. And they have a great head coach in Mick Cronin, one of the better head coaches in all of college basketball. I really, really, really like what UCLA does bring to the table this season. I think they can win the Big Ten in their first year. And I almost forgot, Johnson, about Eric Musselman being at USC. I completely forgot that he left Arkansas, is now at USC. It just does not feel right that he's no longer the Razorbacks head coach. It still stings. I don't know if that stings to you like it does for me, but that does be the case as I was looking at the conference. But let's now go into the SEC. Now, when we look at the SEC, we know how it is dominant in football, but it's also pretty good in basketball as well. And we know,
Yeah, over the last 10 years, it's become a basketball-centric conference, and there's a lot of changes here. And I think the first thing we want to talk before even going into all this,
Mhm.
Coach Cal is trading his blue uniform at
Yeah,
Kentucky for Razorback
Arkansas.
red at Arkansas.
Yeah, I mean they had to make a move after Musselman left, right? I mean, there's no
Was an
other better.
aggressive one.
It was an aggressive one, all right. I mean, getting Calipari to now go from Kentucky there, and they had a pretty big offseason because look how many players departed in the offseason from this Razorbacks team. So they really had to go all out to getting some of these guys to commit to Arkansas, go into Fayetteville, and they did a pretty good job. Is there any particular, you looked at Janelle Davis from Florida Atlantic. They bring in John Will Flan, the number 14th ranked player, Carter Knox as well, Billy Richmond. And they're also obviously not bringing back a lot of players from last season, but that's because, new head coach, you're trying to either buy into the system or you're just, you're either graduating in a sense. So a lot of factors playing into that sense. But Calipari's still got a pretty good team on hand that maybe could be, I don't want to say a dark horse in the SEC, but could very well be one of those teams at the end of the year contending for an SEC title.
Yeah, Boogie Fland. You mentioned John L. Fland. I did want him at St. John's. I think he'll be a great player. I don't know how long he'll be there for. Maybe 1 or 2 seasons at most, if all goes as expected.
Right.
And the reason why Cal is out at Kentucky is because him and the boosters weren't really agreeing, and now he has one of the biggest boosters in the country. I think the Walmart family is Arkansas alumni, so that's going to be one hell of a war chest Calipari has to work with. But you're right,
And
Arizona
obviously
has a really
the postseason success as well for Calipari the last couple of years has not been great.
yeah, no, I mean he's probably one of the most overrated head coach, and I said Arkansas, Arizona before I meant at Arkansas. Want to
Right.
correct myself there. Um, he brought DJ Wagner over from Kentucky, which is hilarious. But a couple of
That's
Kentucky
huge.
guys. So they really want to ride with their head coach, and you have Mark Pope there now, which ironically, I think if he would have stayed at BYU would have been better. And you know why in a little bit because they've invested a lot of money in the NIL. The pressure to win at BYU wouldn't have been as big, and the
Yeah, I
stage
mean,
would have been as big. Does that make sense? So I think Mark
no,
Pope, even though
it
he's an
does.
excellent head coach, he might have jumped the gun a little bit at BYU.
I mean, he loses a lot because of like we know what Kentucky's like standard is sometimes. Like sometimes the players are one and done. Some of the guys, as you mentioned, will have to go play with Calipari. He does bring in some of his players from BYU, so that does help him a little bit. But yeah, it's a lot of turnover from last season for this Kentucky team. A lot of transfers they had to make in the NIL, as you mentioned. They're not necessarily one of the teams that I think people are expecting to win this conference this season. I think everyone's looking at teams like Alabama and Auburn and Tennessee. Those are probably right now the three most favorited teams going into the season to being the SEC champion.
Yeah,
Um,
and if you had to pick an SEC champion, who would you pick? Because I'm going to pick my team right now,
go for it,
and I'm going to go for Auburn here.
Auburn. Okay.
I mean, Bruce Pearl, like you said, is an excellent head coach. Uh, they brought back a lot of high scorers here. They have Johnny Broom here. They have Chad Baker Mazzara here. I know they lost a couple of bigger players, but they retained a lot of their teams, and they got some solid transfers from Georgia and Furman. So I think rounding out that roster, I don't think they're the odds-on favorite, but I think experience wins that in March, and this is a team with experience.
I think the best way to go about experience is, it's a team that I also like, but I don't think I think this team is better just a little bit than Auburn. I'm gonna go with Alabama. I think Nate Oates, another great coach. The biggest thing for Alabama is getting Mark Sears back, a phenomenal score for this team, averaged over 21 points a game last season for them. Getting him back is huge. Chris Youngblood, they got in the transfer portal. You can help me with the pronunciation again. What was his last name? Clifford Amor. How do you say it?
I think it's Omori.
Amorori. Did I say that
Yeah,
right?
I think. I mean, I'm probably butchering it too because I've
I'm
seen it a
probably
million
butchering it
times.
also. Yeah, but they all, as we mentioned, he now goes from Rutgers to now Alabama.
Another
You
guy I want at
also
St. John's.
you got Houston Millette from Pepperdine, who was a big scorer for them, and even Eden Holloway, who was at Auburn, is now coming to Alabama. And big get in the recruiting stages as well. Darian Reed, the number 11 player, is now coming to the Tide. But like I mentioned, getting Sears back is by far the biggest thing that they can get because he's a guy that a lot of people might, including myself, might be in contention to win the Wooden Award this season. And I think the Tide, they proved it last year that they were one of the top teams in the SEC. I think they're going to do it once again, and I think they come out on top and win the SEC championship this upcoming season. And Johnson, with that, and now all leads us to our final conference, a conference that you and I both love, that being the Big East.
Yeah, saving the best for last. You have a loaded conference. I would expect that six of these teams are locks for the NCAA tournament right
They better
now.
be at least.
With a seventh team, maybe Providence sneaks in there. I would say UConn, Creighton, St. John's, Marquette, Xavier, Nova all should be in the tournament, or at least be in the discussion. With Providence kind of being on that, they're right there. Kind of like maybe they'll make it, maybe they won't. But I'm excited for this conference. UConn has once again tried to leave this conference in the offseason, only get rejected because of their football program. And I will say this again that no one cares about Northeastern football. And if they do, they are Pitt fans, Syracuse fans, BC fans, or Rutgers fans. And
Yeah.
those are far and few in between the world of college football. The Northeast is not a college football kind of town or region. So I think they should stop with this nonsense. They should listen to Rick Pitino, make a college basketball super conference like kind of how I know Gonzaga was poached to the Pac-12. They should have poached Gonzaga before that, and I still think there's a lot of mid-major teams the Big East can take won't be that don't want football. They are basketball centered schools, and that's what this conference needs to be. Needs to
Right.
continue to be a basketball centered conference, but make it a super conference to compete with the inevitable college football super conference, so they don't ruin the sport of
Yeah,
basketball
they
as well.
tried to get Gonzaga, and I think they officially obviously went to the Pac-12. They're trying to remake the Pac-12 better now in terms of basketball wise. So um, there's that. But yeah, this conference, as you mentioned, is loaded from top to bottom. I mean, obviously, you got the reigning champion, two-time champions, I should say, UConn go for that three-peat this year. You mentioned Creighton. Obviously, both of us are hoping for St. John's to take that next big step this season. Marquette's usually in a good running. Xavier's in good running. Nova is still good on paper, as well as Providence. And even Seton Hall and Butler could be teams to maybe look out for, maybe being as sneaky teams on the bubble that could make the tournament this season comes ends time. So there are a lot of good teams on paper in this conference. Any in particular, obviously, I know you and I will at least one of us will go into St. John's at some point and what they did this past offseason. But there's any other team that you would like to talk about in the Big East?
I mean, I don't really like talking about these teams, but I feel like I have
Yeah,
to.
yeah.
I mean, we have to talk about Connecticut, right? Obviously,
And
I think they're an unstoppable juggernaut at this point, and they're
did lose a
favored to win
lot.
the. Yeah, they did, but you know
They
what?
did
They
lose a
lost
lot.
it to they lost them to
The NBA draft
grad.
as well. Yeah,
Yeah, not, the NBA draft. Like that's what happened. Like everyone got drafted. They
Klingon,
were,
Gassel, Cam Spencer, Tristan Newton. Their top
and a lot
top
of these
four
guys
scorers all
were
gone.
transfers.
Or
A
four
lot
of
of these
their
guys
top
were
scorers.
transfers. Yeah, a lot of these guys were transfers. So, um, I just don't know what to really expect here because they do bring back Alex Caliban. They have Hassan Diarra, another guy I wanted St. John's a couple of years ago. They have a couple transfers, but not really that great. They have a top 10 prospect here in Liam McNeely, which will probably be a huge contributor, maybe an under the radar type guy. Uh, you have Creighton here, which obviously returns a lot of talent. Let's go into the Johnnies a little bit. Bringing in Kadar Richmond from Seton Hall is going to be a
Huge get.
story. It's going to be a storyline throughout the rest of the season because this is a Syracuse guy that left Syracuse to go Seton Hall, two rivals, big old school Big East rivals, and then he leaves Seton Hall to go St. John's, even bigger rivals. And he's really done the 80s Big East tour of colleges, and his final stop is at St. John's. And hopefully he can recreate some magic here. Triple
I mean,
double magnet. You got Davion Smith from Utah, who's also another triple double magnet here. Had four last year, an average. I think he even had won the NIT last year on the way to the Utes on their pathway last year in the NIT. You got a lot of great guys like under the radar guys like Aaron Scott from North Texas, who is really willing to play either shooting guard, small forward, or power forward. And in the limited time we've seen guys like Zuby Ejiofor, he really took a leap. He had 27 points against Rutgers in a charity exposition game earlier in the year, and the Rutgers is a slated top 25 team. And RJ Lewis Jr., I should say, is expected to be fully healthy this year. So that's where the hype is coming in from here.
Simeon
And
Wilcher
then
also is getting a lot of hype too.
yeah, Simeon Wilcher looks like he's developed a lot, and then you have Jaden Glover who looks better than advertised, and then you
Brady
have
Dunlap as well.
Brady Dunlap. He may be the odd man out over here. We'll
Still
see.
could be
Then
a nice shooter off the bench.
you have 4-star big man Common Maker coming in here, and two Euro imports that have really hyped up. Ruben Preyer's been playing with the Spanish national team, and it's left Terrace, but Lefty Latopoulos, who was playing over in Greece. So that's
Good
going to be a
job.
fun name to say.
Good. I'm glad you said it because I was not going to make an attempt to say it.
Yeah, it's I probably butchered it too, but he's been
Hey,
very hyped as well, playing with
it
the.
sounded good to
I
me.
think
So
I think he's the Greek either under the under 19 or under 18 national team of Greece. He's been dominating kids in his age group, so that'll be exciting to
yeah,
see over here in the Big East.
I think the other team also created. I mean, the biggest loss, obviously, they lost Baylor Shireman this offseason, and they also lost Trey Alexander. That's two big scores. But getting Kalkbrenner back is a huge get for them, too. Also, Stephen Ashworth is coming back. Pop Isaacs, we both wanted him tremendously at one point
I
in the
didn't want
transfer
Pop
portal.
Isaacs so much because I thought we were going to get Davion Smith, which I think is the better
That's
player.
fair. That's fair. Was he, who was the Miami kid we were looking at also? There was a
He
Miami
went to
player, right?
Providence.
He went to
He went to
Providence?
Providence. Yeah, the Miami kid you're thinking of
Uh, is it Bensley Joseph?
it is Bensley Joseph. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember like Pop Isaacs and he were two guys we were looking
Don't
at.
get me wrong. Great prospects,
Yeah,
great
Isaacs
players,
is gonna
but
be a good
I
player
want
for
Smith.
Creighton. Yeah. Isaac will be a good player for Creighton. He averaged near 16 points for Texas Tech last season. So that's a good get for them. A nice incoming freshman class as well. That's why Creighton's right now at the top of, one of the top teams in terms of Vegas odds, in terms of being the favorites to win this Big East conference. Um, Xavier, I think, will be a lot better on paper as well this season. They had a very up and down year last year, but They're returning a lot of key guys from last season's team, a very solid incoming transfer class as well. They did a lot of work in the NIL, so they're expecting a big year out of the Musketeers. And I think overall, when you look at this conference, Johnson, like we mentioned, there's realistically a case for 6 to 7, maybe even 8 teams being at the end of the season in contention to be in the NCAA tournament come March. So
Yeah, I'd say that
it's
I'd say
very, very
eight
good.
teams is the very, very like expanded version of
Butler's
it
like the
because
last exception, in my
yeah,
opinion.
I would say Butler's the last team. But they lost Pasta Alexander to Dayton
That's
in this
true.
offseason as well. So that was a big
Miss
I
Posh.
think I think it's yeah. I mean, Posh was a guy with a huge
I
motor, and
know.
he's gonna succeed at Dayton. So I'm
Yeah.
happy to see that. I hope he wins Player of the Year in the A10, but
Maybe
it'll be a good
Dayton
fit
said
for him.
don't spoil your major pick. That maybe Dayton your pick. Can you
It could
spoil that right
be.
now?
It could be. Maybe. Maybe not.
All
But
right.
let's go
So
pick up Big East winners here
as
now,
I say,
and I
what's
think
your
I'll start off. I'll
yep?
just say UConn because until I'm proven wrong, I'll go with UConn.
I will also go with UConn. So
Hopefully, it's a mush.
I was gonna say, I guess for you and I, maybe hopefully that is a mush. But I mean, yeah, I mean, until proven otherwise, like you mentioned, they have to be the favorite to win the Big East this season. But like we mentioned, there are teams like Creighton and hopefully for our sake, St. John's and maybe even Marquette and Xavier that could contend with them at the top of the Big East standings. And they don't necessarily have to win the regular season title. They just have to beat them in the Big East tournament, which we know is a big spectacle at MSG once March comes around. But that will do it for our Power 5 recaps in terms of our conference champions. Pretty much similar for us. Duke for the ACC for both of us. You have Kansas in the Big 12. I have Houston. You have Rutgers in the Big 10. I have UCLA. You have Auburn in the SEC. I have Alabama. And we rounded out with UConn winning the Big East. Do you want to go into our mid-major surprise team that we think could make it first, or do you want to go into who we think is going to win the Wooden Award?
I have my mid-major surprise ready here.
Okay, go
I
for
will
it.
let you go first if you would like to. If you'd like to go
I'll leave
first.
the floor to you because I'm still debating on mine.
Oh man, 'cause I think I might be taking your pick, so don't blame me now. But
Okay,
I'm
go
going
for
with
it.
the New Mexico Lobos and Richard Pitino.
I had a feeling you were going to go with that. That wasn't my initial pick, but I had a feeling.
Yeah, every single year he's been a college basketball coach. It feels like he's gotten better. I feel like Minnesota majorly dropped the ball by letting him walk. And I know, he won 54-96 in Big Ten play at Minnesota. But you got to remember, he won the NIT championship. He got him to the NCAA tournament, not once, but twice, but won a game too. Had multiple seasons where he had a positive record. And listen, Minnesota basketball is just not good. Let's just face the facts. So he gets canned from there. He recovers, and now he's the head coach at New Mexico. 13,
Right.
19 the first year, not really great. Makes the NIT year two, going 10 games above 500. And this year, wins the conference tournament as the head coach of New Mexico, goes 26-10, and makes it to the NCAA tournament again. He's returning some great players. He's losing Jamal Mashburn Jr. and Jalen House, but he's going to keep Donovan Dentonelli Jr. Joseph, which are two major pieces going forward. He's got a couple of mid-major transfers and major transfers. Such as transfers from, I believe, Georgia Tech, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, he has CJ Nolan from North Texas. He has Atki Ali Atki from BYU. He's got a guy from two Europeans from BYU and Georgia Tech, which names I'm not going to attempt to enunciate. But those guys might be end of bench players because they were semi rotation players at major universities at Arizona, at Georgia Tech. So very my supplies. Very gonna be my big my mid major sleeper. I know the Mountain West had 5 or 6 teams in the
Yeah,
NCAA
very good
tournament
year for the
last year.
conference last year.
They shouldn't have had that, but that's a whole other conversation because not gonna go into it. But yeah, I'm gonna pick the New Mexico Lobos. That's my surprise pick.
Okay, so I'm glad you were able to make that pick and give a little bit of detail because it gave me a little bit of time to make who I think was going to be my pick. And forgot that I forgot this guy transferred this last offseason. And this is a guy that got this team, a particular team, very close into the NCAA tournament. They were one of the last 4 teams out last year. And he now transfers into a team that has had some good reputation the last couple, I would say the last decade, maybe being an NCAA tournament team. My mid-major team, Johnson, is going to be the St. Louis Billikens. That is going to
Oh,
be my pick.
with Robbie Avila.
Robbie Avila is now in
Oh
St.
yeah, that's a
Louis.
good pick.
They also bring in Isaiah Swoop from Indiana State. Two of their top scorers from Indiana State are now with the Billikens going into the season. They get Kobe Johnson from West Virginia, so we'll see if that plays a factor. But they're also bringing back some big guys like Gibson Jimerson. And how about Larry Hughes the second? Gotta love Larry Hughes. I think I think the Billikens could be that team in March where you're looking at it. I want to see Robert Avila. I want to see him in the NCAA tournament. They deprived of us last season. They won. They won the net, right? Indiana State.
Yes.
Yeah, they deprived us of an NCAA tournament bid for him. I need to see it happen this season. I want to see them go on a run. Give me the St. Louis Billikens to be my mid-major surprise this upcoming season. Now, since we got after that, I'm going to make sure. I know Russell sometimes. Shout out to Russell Goddard, a frequent listener to our show and a frequent guest host of our show. I don't know if he's going to listen to this one. He's not a big college basketball guy as we are, but I will make sure that I gave Robbie Avila a shout out, and I'll make sure that he knows about that once we wrap up our show tonight. But nonetheless, shots, and let's go into who we think is going to win the Wooden Award this season. Who is your pick?
Hunter Dickinson. I think he's the best player in college basketball right now, and I think the best player in college basketball will win the award. So no big explanation really needed there.
I'm going to go with Mark Sears. I'm going to go with Mark Sears.
Alabama.
I am. Yep. I am kind of high on the Tide this season. I think Mark Sears coming off a 21-point performance, per game last year with the Tide. I think he takes another step this season for Alabama, and I really think the Tide are going to be a number one seed in this upcoming NCAA tournament this season. So I got Mark Sears winning the Wooden Award this year. That's going to be my pick. All right, and now for the granddaddy of them all, Johnson, the last three things that we're going to be picking on tonight's show. Let's first make our picks to see who will make the Final Four this season. Now, we could have maybe a team that's a Cinderella. That's more than likely going to happen because of recent tournaments' previous history. But maybe we just play it safe and try to pick teams that we can potentially mush at the end of the season. So, what are some of your teams that you think are going to make the Final Four this year?
Uh, Duke, Houston, Kansas, and who else do I want to mush?
I was to say, just go for the teams to mush. I'm sorry, you haven't said one of them.
I don't want to see. I don't want to see Creighton there, so I'm gonna pick Creighton.
You don't want to see you rather see UConn in there?
Because of pick UConn, I feel like that's too easy.
That's fair. That's fair.
I mean, realistically, as a fan, I want to see St. John's, Rutgers, Texas A&M, and Nebraska, but that's never going to happen. That's what I want to see there.
I mean, listen, if there was any time, I mean, St. John's and Rutgers could maybe be that Cinderella team this season. You never know.
At least we could in there.
At least we could. Hey, Princeton, shout out. They were. I mentioned earlier, Arizona lost in the first round. They lost to Princeton. Princeton. You never know.
Never know. Listen, all teams are equal in March.
Right. Exactly. I agree with that.
Those are teams that I realistically, I think Kansas and Duke do make the Final Four. They have the pedigree and the players because experience does win in March. And then Creighton's my dark horse, and I won't. I guess I can't count out L.J. Cryer in Houston, potential Wooden Award winner there. So experience wins in March. And Connecticut, I'm not really sold on them yet. I don't think they go back to back to back.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to win. It's probably spoiling. I don't think they win the Natty. I don't. This is not like their team's good, but it's not like last season's team good. Like they were stupid last season. There was like if you were able to get close with them or beat them, like you deserve an award. Like that's how good their team was last season. Some of my teams to make the Final Four this year, I should say. I have Alabama. I mentioned it. I'm pretty high on the Tide this season. I think they're going to have a very, very, very good season. Unfortunately for you Crimson Tide fans, if I pick them now, that means they most likely are screwed once we get to March. But we'll see. Maybe things can change. I do have Alabama in there. I will go. I'll go with UConn. I think it's just tough not to pick them at this point. I still think they are good enough to make a Final Four, but I won't have them in my national title game. Spoiler alert for that. I do have the Tide. I have the Huskies, and then to round out my Final Four, I am going to go. I cannot believe I'm saying this, Johnson. I'm going to pick Gonzaga. I want to ask you if that was going to be a scumbag way to go about picking my mid-major surprise, because technically they are a mid-major, but
I wasn't gonna discuss that because
yeah, yeah,
that's kind of cheating.
yeah, that's what I thought. But I think they could make the Final Four this season, which for me is surprising because you know how much I don't really like this entire school. I'm not a big fan of Gonzaga, but once I go to the Pac-12, maybe my stance will change on them. Once that
Play real
happens,
schedule.
right, right. And then to round out my Final Four, I've been going back and forth on who I think could make it. I think at the end of the day, for me, it comes down to who I think has been there before. I can make it there. I think you'll like this one. I'm gonna go with UNC as my last pick. Um, I know you're not a big UNC guy either, so I think you'll appreciate my four teams. The only team you probably won't appreciate is me picking Gonzaga, if I had to guess, because I know you like Gonzaga.
I don't have beef with Gonzaga at all.
That's what I'm saying. Like, I think you'll have beef with me
Yeah.
picking them because I probably mushed them. So what's your national championship game?
Kansas Duke, and then Kansas is the winner.
So
America loses.
you're just fully going for it, huh?
Yeah, might as well
Okay.
listen. I gotta full send something, right?
My national championship game, I'm gonna go with Alabama against UNC. I think we see a great match between Mark Sears and what's his name from UNC? Davis. We talked about him before.
Jonell Davis.
No, RJ Davis. RJ Davis. Yeah,
Of course, RJ
yeah.
Davis. Jonell Davis, I think, went to Arkansas.
Yes.
Yeah,
I was trying to think of his name. Like, he was one of the other guys I was considered for the Wooden Award. I think those are going to be the two teams to play in the national championship game, and I will go with the Alabama Crimson Tide to ring down the Nets and win the national championship this season. I think Nate Oates finally gets it done, and Alabama starts to establish themselves as a basketball school finally.
that's crazy to say it, but I think you may be right there.
Now, I think I've done this before. I picked Alabama as my national champion, and I think they lost in like the second round. So if you're a Crimson Tide fan, I apologize, but you might be screwed when it comes to March. But I'm all in on the Tide, as I mentioned. I think they're going to be a very dominant team. But obviously, Johnson, for our sakes, we are hoping that St. John's can finally make that run this season and maybe can get things going, especially when it comes to March. They have decent odds this year when it comes to the national championship. If you look at Vegas odds. I'm trying to do a count really quick. I have what their best odds are.
St. John's, I think, is plus 550 to win the Big East.
They are, yeah, and then they're plus 5,000 to most books as winning the national championship.
That's not too bad.
No, it's same odds as Rutgers, same odds as Tennessee, Indiana,
Yeah,
pretty much Creighton, Purdue.
that's a good starting point.
No, like you mentioned, there's a good team on paper. We have a good team on paper. We just got to make sure it all works together, and we have a great head coach that can potentially get all those pieces together. So
In
that
Rick
does
we
it.
trust.
Exactly, and Rick we trust. And I know he's going to be pulling for the New York Yankees tonight, and we can use all the faith because the Yankees are getting their asses kicked so far in this World Series. It has not been fun, but that's a different talk for a different day. We'll be recapping the World Series once that series is over with. But that's going to do it for college basketball, Johnson. Fun episode here tonight, and now we get to see how it all unfolds next week with the first week of the college basketball season starting on Monday night. And we'll see if our Giants can make some noise in this year's NCAA in the Big East and maybe even in the NCAA tournament. But for this week's edition of the All Gas Don't Break Sports Show, my name is Nicholas Pavona. I have been joined by my co-host Andrew Johnson. We'll be sure to recap the college basketball season at some point in the regular season once we get a little bit closer towards March Madness, and we'll be breaking down what happens in the season in terms of conference play, going into some of our picks to bake the tournament, and our bubble watch as well. So definitely stay tuned in later on in the season for that show. But for the All Gas No Break Sports Show, that is going to do it. My name is Nicholas Pavona, joined alongside by my co-host Andrew Johnson. Thank you for listening and enjoy the rest of your week.